An escort was arrested in the spring of 2018 following a hotel meetup with a male teenager in Orange County, Florida. Local law enforcement discovered the illegal tryst after speaking to the unnamed boy and his father. The 28-year-old escort in question was identified through her UK passport as Sarah Louise McGill, a Scottish professional clinical hypnotherapist who reportedly ran her own business in Edinburgh. How she'd come to provide escort services in Florida remained unclear. The teen had found her under her working name, Sophia Bell, after searching Quora.com. They started texting and subsequently met at a Marriott hotel where the teen paid her $480 for intercourse. The police then went to the same fourth-floor room and found McGill with another client. The safe in the room was reportedly filled with cash as well as wrapped and unwrapped contraceptive devices. McGill was arrested for lascivious battery and taken to the Orange County Jail. She was ordered to surrender her UK passport as law enforcement wanted to ensure that she remained in Florida. Number 6. Cindy Pham. In the early hours of February the 4th of 2024, an unnamed 29-year-old man was left clinging to life after being struck by a Subaru Liberty on South Dowling Street at Moore Park in Sydney, Australia. He'd been riding an e-bike when he collided with the vehicle, which ran him over, leaving tire marks on his chest and pelvis. Paramedics fought to save his life by the roadside for an hour, and he was subsequently taken to St. Vincent's Hospital, where he remained in critical condition as of the latest updates. When responding officers interviewed the Subaru's driver, they found that she was wearing just a leather bra, bondage-type leather shorts, and a pair of glasses. 27-year-old Cindy Pham told law enforcement that she was an escort on her way to meet a client. A breathalyzer test subsequently revealed that she was roughly twice the drink-drive limit, and she was taken into custody. Pham wasn't charged in connection to the e-bike collision, and a hearing for her DUI case was set for March the 14th. Pham was on a working holiday to Sydney when the accident took place. The woman had several convictions in her home state of Western Australia, including disorderly conduct, assault occasioning actual bodily harm, and a 7-month ban for drunk driving in 2022. Number 5. Melanie Williams. According to an FBI affidavit, 22-year-old Los Angeles escort Melanie Williams was arrested on Christmas Eve 2017 after she'd gruesomely assaulted a woman she'd recruited into the intercourse for money trade. Williams left little to the imagination regarding her activities, as she called herself Pretty Ho online and widely advertised on social media the services she performed and ran. On her official website, Williams described herself as the most hated hoe in LA. The face-tattooed procuress had once boasted in a Snapchat post, "I'm not scared of jail, so stop telling me anything about the MF police." One of her Instagram posts read, "Who 18 plus and want to make some legit money?" It would emerge that she'd recruited at least 2 minors via the internet and then kept the proceeds from the acts in which they'd engaged with their clients for her own benefit. YouTube clips and other social media videos, some which Williams had posted herself, showed her beating unknown young women and threatening them with a gun. One video also showed her raining down punches on a shirtless man outside an LA home, while another woman shouted at her to stop. After having previously been given a 3-month sentence for escort-related activities, Williams was arrested again in December of 2017 after she'd tormented a woman that she'd recruited. To enforce the control she had over her unnamed victim, Williams ordered her to strip naked, after which she threw bleach on her and beat her with a broomstick. Williams took her belongings and identity documents, in addition to forcing the victim to have her name, Melanie, tattooed on her face to show that she was her property. A video on Williams's confiscated phone showed her threatening the victim with a gun, asking if she was going to leave. During the legal proceedings that followed, Williams admitted to the assault and that she'd recruited the teenage girls, pleading guilty to 1 count of trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. In the winter of 2019, she was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Number 4. Nia Wilson. A Las Vegas escort was taken into custody on November the 1st of 2023 after she brutally beat and robbed an elderly man at the Caesars Palace Las Vegas Hotel and Casino. On the morning of October the 27th, a security guard was called to one of the rooms, whereupon he found the victim, a man in his late 60s, lying on the floor. His face was covered in blood, his eyes were swollen shut, and he had suffered multiple facial fractures. Blood was splattered throughout the room, staining the bed sheets, floor and furniture. The victim told the police that he'd been approached by a woman later identified as 26-year-old Nia Wilson after he'd finished gambling in the early hours of October the 27th and was cashing out his winnings. The man claimed that Wilson was very aggressive in her approach as she offered to take him up to his room for a good time, initially charging him only $200. Upon reaching the room, Wilson reportedly asked for an additional $300 and the man agreed. They had intercourse, after which Wilson demanded another $500, but the victim refused to pay, claiming he'd already done so. In the moments that followed, Wilson became aggressive and tried to take the wallet out of the man's pants. Wilson then pummeled the victim as he tried to stop her. Video showed her walking away from the man's room and being alone in the elevator at 6:43 a.m. after they'd previously been recorded entering the elevator together from the casino floor at around 5:57 a.m. Police recovered more videos after identifying the taxi which Wilson had taken to leave the hotel. She reportedly vomited immediately after entering the vehicle, but then apologized to the driver, offering him $100 to leave the area fast. Video showed the woman in a state of panic throughout the ride. When the trip concluded, she offered the driver an additional $200, telling him, "You never came here. This didn't happen." Wilson was taken into custody from her Henderson apartment a few days later and faced charges of attempted murder, residential burglary, and robbery. Number 3. Meline Joan Lewin. In mid-August of 2020, an Australian escort was charged with manslaughter after it was determined she'd been involved in the death of a 52-year-old businessman. On August the 12th, Anthony Brady's body was discovered at the Sunshine Tower Hotel in Cairns. He was found face down with his arms and legs bound to the bed. Brady was wearing a gag in his mouth as well as a hood on his head and a rope around his neck. The Brisbane man had flown to Cairns for business, but had failed to contact his family for several days, and they consequently reported him missing. Brady had last been captured on CCTV at a Caltex petrol station close to the hotel. Investigators followed up on the lead and discovered that he'd hired 32-year-old Meline Joan Lewin for bondage intercourse. The shaved-headed escort was subsequently arrested in Manora. She pleaded not guilty to the manslaughter charge and chose to represent herself during the ensuing trial. Lewin did little to prove her innocence, as she didn't make opening or closing statements, call witnesses, or perform cross-examinations. It would emerge that Brady's death had been the result of a bondage game gone wrong that had led to his breathing being fatally restricted. Lewin was reportedly under the influence of drugs as they had relations. Justice James Henry determined that the businessman must have given some indication of distress, but Lewin self-indulgently continued on in disregard of his safety. She did nothing to ease or release his restraints and fled the room when Brady became unresponsive. At the time of the ill-fated hotel rendezvous, Lewin was on parole after she'd been given a 16-month sentence in 2019 for several offenses that included assaulting multiple police officers and carjacking. Justice Henry remarked upon the lack of concern that Lewin had had for Brady, as well as the self-centeredness and lack of empathy that she displayed during the trial. He told her to have remained as resolute as you did exhibits an extraordinary level of self-control and willpower. It took a jury less than an hour to find her guilty of manslaughter, and she was sentenced to 6.5 years behind bars in the fall of 2022. By then, she'd already served 491 days of her sentence. Today's topic was requested by rsign100, River Parish, and Psy3248. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Louise Dean. In the early hours of December the 4th of 2019, English escort Louise Dean parked her vehicle behind a stationary Uber driven by Mohammed Dara in the Walkden area of Greater Manchester. Dara was about to collect his final fare following a 7-hour shift when he saw Dean pull up. The woman then got into Dara's vehicle, brandished a dirty syringe and made thrusting motions, threatening to stab the driver if he didn't surrender his earnings. Dara managed to get out of his car and was chased by Dean. During the chase, his watch became loose and fell to the ground, after which it was picked up by the escort. Dara had limited mobility due to his asthma and replacement hip. Therefore, Dean quickly caught up to him. She threatened him with the syringe again, and the man gave her £30 from his wallet, claiming it was all he had. Dean took it and fled. In the incident's wake, Dara reported her to the police and she was arrested. The woman's subsequent report would be described as a disgraceful pack of lies, as she claimed that she'd tried to retrieve some money that Dara owed her after they'd had intimate relations. The police examined the woman's phone and her story unraveled, as there was no trace of previous contact between her and Dara. The initial attack and the escort's lies would have a heavy toll on the Uber driver's mental health, and he was no longer able to return to the job he'd held for 4 years. He struggled with depression, for which he underwent therapy. Dean was released as the legal proceedings into the attack unfolded, and in 2021, she was involved in a physical altercation with mother of 3, Claire Bold, over a missing credit card. During the fight, 38-year-old Bold bit off a chunk of Dean's nose. A judge in that case would note that Bold had acted with animal savagery, and she was jailed for 6 years in 2022. The mauling left Dean permanently disfigured, reportedly resulted in people staring at her in the street and calling her Miss Piggy. Her legal counsel in the Dara case told Manchester Crown Court that Dean had experienced much trauma in her life, including the disfigurement and being estranged from her family, in addition to struggling with anxiety and depression. Her legal representative stated that she didn't remember much from the attack on the Uber driver, adding that she felt remorseful. A judge, however, highlighted the lies she'd told the police in an attempt to demean her victim and justify her actions. Ultimately, Dean was jailed for 3 years and 9 months at Manchester Crown Court in February of 2023 after having previously admitted to robbery. Stay put after number 1 if you'd like to see our previous episode on when strippers go wrong as well still. Number 1. Angelina Bini. 33-year-old Andrea Zamperoni, the head chef at Cipriani Dolce at Grand Central Terminal in New York City, was reported missing by his colleagues in August of 2019 after he'd failed to show up for work. The man, who was originally from Italy, had also reportedly missed a weekly call with his mother. 4 days after the missing persons report had been filed, his body was found at the Camway Lodge in Elmhurst, Queens, after a woman had called 911 to report that he wasn't breathing. 41-year-old Angelina Bini opened the door to the hotel room for responding officers. She told them that she was an escort whom Zamperoni had hired. According to court records, officers observed a garbage can with bed linens stuffed inside and what appeared to be a bare human foot sticking out of the bed linens. Bini claimed that Zamperoni had died after taking liquid ecstasy, which had been supplied by her procurer. From the room, officers also recovered glass pipes typically used for consuming narcotics, bottles of bleach and bleach-soaked towels, a power saw, and an empty suitcase. They also found a purple liquid in a glass with powder at the top of the liquid and around the rim. Bini was captured entering the room with Zamperoni at 4:58 a.m. on August the 18th. The latter was never seen again, while the escort was captured going in and out of the room multiple times in the days that followed. Footage showed her dragging a garbage can from a nearby alley into the room. Bini would blame the entire incident on her procurer, claiming that he didn't let her call the police in spite of Zamperoni bleeding from his nose and mouth. Bini claimed that her procurer had considered cutting up the body to dispose of it. In spite of her attempt to shift the blame for Zamperoni's death, it was revealed that Bini had run the scheme of drugging and robbing her clients with fatal results several times that same summer. She was linked to the overdose deaths of 3 other men on July the 4th, July the 11th, and August the 5th. The victims were found at seedy Queens motels in Astoria, Woodside, and College Point, and surveillance footage confirmed that Bini was the last person with whom they were seen. To incapacitate and rob them, Bini gave them drugs that contained fatal doses of fentanyl. Zamperoni himself had succumbed to a fatal dose of gamma-butyriolactone. Bini remained in the same room with his decomposing body for 3 days. Her boyfriend, Leslie Lascano, a man in his early 40s, then went shopping with Zamperoni's Amex card, buying cigarettes, gift cards and snacks at Barini's behest. Lascano, who was described as a dupe and a sucker by his defense, was later sentenced to 32 months behind bars for his role in Zamperoni's death. A judge agreed that Bini was the mastermind and that Lascano had participated in the scheme with willful blindness. In August 2021, Bini pleaded guilty to 2 counts of distributing narcotics that caused the deaths of a person, 1 count of distributing fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine, and 1 count of conspiring to distribute gamma-butyroolactone. United States Attorney Breon Peace argued that Bini had displayed complete disregard for human life, as she drugged and killed multiple people for a few quick dollars. The escort was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Number 7. Melissa Dacia and Nesh Rivera. Exotic dancers Melissa Dacia and Nesh Rivera, aged 22 and 25 respectively, were arrested by law enforcement in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, for stealing a police officer's gun in February of 2019. The latter had been communicating with Rivera, who'd assumed the pseudonym Natalia on Instagram. Aside from dancing, she worked as an escort and had been among several exotic dancers arrested for offering illegal services at the Foxy Lady in Pawtucket in December of the previous year. She and the off-duty officer went to Nara Lounge in Providence, where they met Dacia before the trio headed to the Cadillac Lounge Gentlemen's Club. Prior to doing so, the Boston officer, whose identity wasn't disclosed, secured his service Glock handgun with a cable lock in the glove compartment of his BMW 328i. After going to the club, the trio went to the officer's room at the Hampton Inn to reportedly hang out. In the early hours of the morning, Dacia claimed she needed to retrieve a charger from the officer's car, and he gave her the keys. She briefly came back and said she needed to step out and make a call before leaving again. Rivera claimed she'd go look for her, but both women never returned. The officer then checked his car and found that his pistol was missing from the glove box, at which point he alerted local authorities. Both of the women were subsequently arrested and charged with felony larceny of a firearm and conspiracy, while the officer's weapon was retrieved. Number 6. Lee Grace Doy. Leading up to August of 2011, Florida woman Lee Grace Doy, aged 29, had worked as an exotic dancer and adult model, but her career abruptly ended when her brother got into legal trouble. She lived in Lacoochee, Florida, along with her younger brothers Ryan and Dylan, aged 21 and 26 respectively. The trio all had criminal records, but the former had recently violated the terms of his parole by engaging in inappropriate online communication with a minor. Lee Grace and Dylan orchestrated an escape plan of taking their brother to Mexico. On August the 2nd, the trio's white Subaru Impreza was spotted by a Zephyr Hills police officer going over the speed limit on US 301. When the officer initiated a traffic stop, the Dohertys engaged him in a 100-mile-per-hour chase. The pursuit ended in about 4 miles after Dylan had shot at the cruiser up to 20 times. One of the bullets struck a tire, disabling the vehicle as the trio sped out of the county. They then carried out a bank robbery in Valdosta, Georgia. The Dohertys entered the building wearing masks, and one of them discharged an AK-47 into the ceiling before they made off with roughly $5,200. The trio's rampage ended in Pueblo, Colorado, 9 days after it had begun, in a shootout with local law enforcement. By then, Lee Grace had become one of the U.S.'s most wanted women. As the Subaru was chased by officers, Ryan drove it at speeds of up to 120 miles per hour, weaving in and out of traffic through construction zones and highway shoulders. Simultaneously, Dylan shot at pursuing cruisers with the AK. The 20-mile chase ended with Ryan crashing into a highway guardrail. He and Lee Grace jumped out of the disabled vehicle and fled on foot, but Dylan was arrested while still inside. When law enforcement closed in on them, the exotic dancer pointed a machine pistol at an officer and was non-fatally shot in the thigh. The Dohertys were taken into custody. During a court appearance a few days later, Lee Grace caught media attention by smiling in court and appearing to be in high spirits while still wheelchair-bound from the injury. She told the court, "I pointed the gun at the cop. I deserve to get shot." No fatalities or major injuries were reported during the Dohertys' rampage, but their actions resulted in a plethora of charges for which each was sentenced to decades behind bars. Number 5. Christina Hensley. 35-year-old exotic dancer Christina Hensley was sentenced to 10 years in prison in April of 2011 after pleading guilty to involuntary manslaughter and failure to stop after an accident. In August of the previous year, she'd been called to the home of Jai Chow in Monroe, about 25 miles north of Cincinnati, Ohio, for a private show. Hensley would later tell the authorities that Cho had touched her inappropriately during the performance, prompting her to leave his home. The prosecution would argue during her trial that she'd fled the residence after robbing Cho. The latter went outside and jumped in front of Hensley's SUV, trying to stop her. The exotic dancer accelerated, ran the 31-year-old man over, and dragged him underneath her car for more than a mile before stopping at a gas station. Cho was mangled beneath the vehicle and suffered multiple blunt force trauma injuries that resulted in his death. The autopsy photos were described as very hard to look at by the Hamilton Journal news media outlet. Hensley, who at the time worked as a dancer to support her 3 children, subsequently told the police that she'd felt her SUV strike something but maintained she had no idea Cho was beneath it when she started driving away. She was initially charged with murder, aggravated robbery, theft, and failure to stop before pleading guilty to lesser charges. Number 4. Leon's Badowski. In February of 2013, a brawl erupted at the Baltic Inn in the village of Pontiates, South Wales, following the last-minute replacement of a male exotic dancer. Roughly 150 women had packed into the pub to watch an experienced performer named Fabio, whom they'd each paid £10 to see. He had to cancel, and the fantasy strip agency sent in 29-year-old novice performer Leon's Badowski, who, come showtime, walked on stage in a fireman's uniform that didn't fit properly. The crowd soon reacted in disappointment. As reported by one woman in attendance, he lacked Fabio's signature six-pack and looked like he'd come off the street. She went on to say that Badowski, a practicing boxer, looked like he'd been hit in the face with a wok. Additionally, the man didn't have a dance routine and spat frothy cream at the women before he sat on a chair in the middle of the stage and just glared at them. The women started booing and throwing napkins at the stage, which enraged Badowski. He jumped into the ladies' night crowd and started attacking them. He pulled a woman's hair before charging the compere and the manager. 5 police cars were sent to break up the scuffle, and Badowski was taken into custody. He subsequently admitted 3 common assault charges and was ordered to undergo a mental health evaluation. Number 3. Bingo and exotic dancing. A nursing home in Taiwan issued a public apology in September of 2022 after a video went viral of an exotic dancer entertaining more than a dozen wheelchair-bound seniors. Staff at Taoyuan Veterans Home, a state-run facility in Taoyuan City for retired Army personnel, decided to hire an exotic dancer as part of upcoming Harvest Festival celebrations. On September the 7th, in what would have been an ordinary bingo afternoon for residents, a young woman wearing high heels and lingerie arrived at the nursing home. She began her routine, which also involved giving the seniors lap dances as they and staff clapped along to music. The dancer was vivaciously interacting with the residents and at one point was seen pushing her breasts into a senior's face. The footage went viral, and while the consensus was that the dancer was just doing her job, the veterans' home decision to hire her was criticized. A spokesman subsequently apologized, arguing that the young woman's moves had been too enthusiastic and fiery, and pledged to be more careful when planning such events in the future. Number 2. Chad Satchel. The elite special response group in Perth, Australia, closed down a street in the city in August of 2022 following reports that a man clad in a bulletproof vest and carrying an assault rifle had been spotted in the King Street area. Heavily armed law enforcement units swarmed on the suspect, identified as 31-year-old Chad Satchel. They learned that in spite of the initial panic, the man wasn't an active shooter but an exotic dancer on his way to work. His costume was meant to be a provocative version of a SWAT officer, and his rifle, in spite of its realistic appearance, was intended to be a prop. He was detained without incident and was reported as cooperative in the immediate aftermath. The adult performer still faced a hefty fine or even jail time, as the police suspected his rifle was a gel pellet blaster, which shoots water-filled gel projectiles at up to 100 meters per second. They were outlawed in Western Australia as part of an effort to combat criminal elements who would smuggle the replicas into the country and convert them into real weapons. As of subsequent developments, the police were conducting tests on Satchel's confiscated rifle to determine whether the prop feature had been disabled. The exotic dancer faced maximum penalties of up to 3 years in jail and a $36,000 fine. Number 1. Jasmine Clifford. In 2021, an exotic dancer from New Jersey was identified as the mastermind behind an operation that produced and sold at least 250 fake COVID-19 vaccination cards. As reported by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, 31-year-old Jasmine Clifford advertised the fraudulent services using the Instagram account Anti-Vax Mama. She would charge $200 per card, and for an additional $250, customers could get their name in the New York State Immunization Information System. Her alleged co-conspirator, 27-year-old Nadia Barkley, handled the registration through her position at a medical clinic in Pachogue. Over a dozen of the exotic dancer's customers were public-facing individuals from New York who worked in hospitals or nursing homes. After an investigation into the operation, Clifford and Barkley were arrested and each charged with offering a false instrument for filing and conspiracy, while their customers were charged with criminal possession of a forged document. As part of their efforts in bringing down the scam, officers had posed as prospective buyers. One of them contacted Clifford on June the 25th of 2021 and received a fake vaccination card after paying the fee, thus securing evidence against her. Another undercover officer paid to be introduced into the New York vaccine database, and Clifford subsequently sent them a screenshot indicating his info had been added. Thanks for watching. Would you rather have a private video leak out or be wrongfully accused of being a peeping Tom? Let us know in the comments section below.